Hi, everybody. This is Susan Clinton, one of your hosts of Tough to Treat. And today we are going to be listening to a webinar that I did on Menopause Talks, heart rate variability, and as a predictor and as an intervention for stress and for sleep. This is a really important webinar, I think, because most people look at these issues in very complicated ways. And in the webinar today that you'll be listening to, you'll be able to really ascertain some interesting information about sleep and about stress and how we can work with improving our heart rate variability to effectively begin to manage both of these pieces of important healthcare. Enjoy the webinar. Thank you so much, and welcome to August. It's learning to live without our sex hormones. It's learning to live in a different way. And guess what? We did it before. You know, in our early years in our life, we lived just fine without the sex hormones until, you know, we became of age and started menstruating and having the hormones enter in to, you know, start to prepare us for our reproductive years. When we get to this phase, we no longer need those because we're not going to reproduce anymore. But it doesn't mean that we stop living, and it doesn't mean that we have to die early, and it certainly doesn't mean that we have to suffer. So we're going to dive into a few basic things, and we're going to talk about this as we move forward. I'm hoping that I'm not talking too low on this. I don't know where everybody's background is, but it's always good to kind of go back and remember the definitions of a couple of things, but we'll move quickly into what it means in the application and how we can actually improve these markers of health that are so important. So what is heart rate variability? What's the difference between heart rate variability and just our heart rate? So heart rate variability, if you look at this, this is a simple QRS wave that we see on electrocardiogram here. And the variability of heart rate is the differences between the top of the peak R to the next peak R. So this should have a great deal of variability. And heart rate is nothing but counting these beats, these R waves as we go through a full minute. So the difference is the difference between what the rate is, or what the space is between these R waves versus how many of them there are. Okay, and that's kind of important when we think about this, because heart rate can tell us a little bit about heart rate variability, but there's more information that heart rate variability can tell us. Heart rate raises when we're stressed. Heart rate raises when we are working out. Heart rate raises when we need to act. And our heart rate variability gives us the ability to have that variance and that ease of going up, but also the ease of that heart rate coming down when it's supposed to. So the better the heart rate variability, the lower the heart rate, the resting heart rate. The worse the heart rate variability, the higher the resting heart rate is. So they have a bit of an inverse relationship here. So what does this mean? We can look at heart rate variability with blood pressure, and then we can also look at it with respiration. So let's consider blood pressure first. If our blood pressure begins to elevate, the baroreceptors, which are these nerves that live in our carotid arteries at the base of our big arteries at the bottom of our throat, they basically, when the blood pressure goes up, they reflectively activate what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, or for many of you understand, the vagus nerve. But basically what we're trying to do is inhibit the flight or fight system, causing the heart rate to decrease, which would make sense, right? And then causing the blood pressure to also decrease. And then if we have a decreased blood pressure, they actually take the brakes off of those baroreflected nerves, and that allows that flight or fight system to come on a little bit to increase and restore blood pressure levels. So think about this with laying down in bed at night. We really want this elevated blood pressure to come down. We're no longer working. We're no longer on our feet. We need to bring this down a little bit more. So there's a lot of stimulation in this area to inhibit the flight or fight system so that the heart rate will begin to decrease even more and our blood pressure will decrease. We don't need the blood pressure up at this point. But when we get up in the morning, we need to act. We need to have the blood pressure come on a little bit. We need to be able to be in a state of readiness. And so we need the heart rate to increase slightly. What the difference is when we're healthy is that we have a lovely variance between this all throughout the day. When we're not healthy or we're in a disease state, we end up with the heart rate increased and never really coming down as well. And we're overworking in this flight or fight system a little too much. If we take this down to just thinking about breathing, this is what's very cool, because breath is going to be the anchor we can use into the system to change it. But if we think about when we inhale, we actually get a slight increase in heart rate, which means that we have a decrease in heart rate variability. Because if you think about those R waves coming close together, coming faster, there's going to be less of a chance for them to have variance in between. When we exhale, the vagal activity resumes, or comes down a little bit, and we have a decrease in heart rate. And that happens with every beat during respiration. So think about the variability between, a slower heart rate and a faster heart rate. We're going to have much more room for variance in a slower heart rate. But every time we breathe, we're going to have that variance come into play. So it's really an important marker of our health. And there's really some lovely ways that we can begin to act and affect it. So one of the big things that people think about is, how do I measure this? What do I do? What is baseline? How often should I measure my heart rate variability? What do I use to measure it? We'll get into that in just a little bit, but you can think about some of the wearables that are out there. There's wearables that you can wear and put on your chest and do it with a watch, and it'll measure your heart rate. It'll measure heart rate variability. It'll give you a baseline. And with all measures of heart rate variability, there's always a little bit of a stabilization period for the machinery or the contact points to get to know you. And then there's the time that you measure it. And usually it takes about 2.5 minutes to get a decent measure. So you can do, some will measure just like right on your wrist. Others will measure over time. So my clients all wear a Garmin VideoSmart 4 because it's the most cost-effective thing for them to get. And through their stress algorithm, we can figure out what their heart rate variability is. A lot of people like the Aura Ring. The Aura Ring tracks heart rate variability, but only at night. The nice thing about that is you can get a baseline reading in the morning from it, because you want to do that within the 30 minutes after you wake up. So it kind of gives you a state of readiness and a baseline heart rate variability that might be easier to read, but both devices work very well. There's a ton of other devices out there that are more expensive that probably do the same thing, but I like to go with the most simplest thing possible and the best way for me to track people and to help them track themselves. So how often to measure? You should probably look at it about, as many days a week as you could. So if you miss too many days in a row, you might miss key events. So in other words, if you have a very restless night and you're not tracking it, and you don't track it again until 2 days later, you're going to miss what happened during those 3 days. What happened during that time? How long did it take me to recover? And did I recover adequately in a quicker period of time, or did it take me 3 days to recover? Or oftentimes our heart rate variability will drop when we're fighting off an infection, even though we may not be symptomatic. So heart rate variability can give us clues into what our state of health is. And it also is lower in people who are having chronic diseases and chronic infections. So it tells us that, the fatigue that people get with these things has its roots inside of not just the immune system, but also the piece of the puzzle that deals with the immune system, which is the GI system, which is directly affected by heart rate variability. So you want to think about that as well. So the measurements are easy to do. You really want to do them first thing in the morning upon waking within 30 minutes. It's like, think about it like basal temperature, when you're tracking your menstrual cycle and ovulation. You do it first thing, as you kind of wake up in the morning, before you get out of bed, you take your basal temperature to see where you are. For people with illnesses and stuff, that's an ideal time to take their temperature to compare over days, which is important. But practically, you may just need to do it during a rest time that is convenient for your schedule. So people who travel a lot or have shift schedule changes or different other types of, they just can't do it in the morning. It's impossible with everything that they have to do. You want it, the main thing is that you want it to be consistent. So you're measuring a consistent measure day after day. Okay. So that's just a little bit on when to measure. We can talk about that a little bit later. So you want to track over time to look for changes as you work on HRV biofeedback. So some of the things that we know here is that age, gender, health, and fitness levels are the main demographic influencers on heart rate variability. All right. Higher heart rate variability is correlated with increased fitness, health, and youthfulness. Here's the most important thing. The autonomic nervous system activities, especially with parasympathetic regulation, our ability to come down out of stress, okay? That variance that we need to reset back to our lower levels when we don't need to have a stress effect, actually diminishes with age. And then for women and men too, because they've got a declining testosterone, it just happens a little later than ours does. Hormonal factors play a role, okay, for the observed age and gender related differences. So if you look at the little chart here, you can see low adaptability are going to have much lower HRVs, and higher adaptability is going to have higher HRVs. So the impact of, regulation of the nervous system. How can we regulate our nervous system? Do we have a mindfulness practice, meditation? What are we doing to put the brakes on all day long? A lower risk of high blood pressure comes with a higher heart rate variability. And we all know that, essential hypertension tends to increase in the menopause years. Our sleep recovery, being able to really recover well in our sleep, not just sleep, but really have good recovery, and, enhanced cognitive performance, and of course, better physical performance, all are really important applications of this. And this is where heart rate variability can kind of be a predictor for what's going on in our body as a whole, not just with the heart itself, with the heart beating, but how much variance in that, and what does that mean as far as higher adaptability as we move into our menopause years. So we talked a little bit about sleep and recovery. There's a couple of things I just wanted to say here for sure. Obviously, sleep quality affects HRV. So the poorer our sleep quality, such as things like even, people who are just not sleeping well, whether or not they have sleep apnea or insomnia, can have lower heart rate variability. They can be pretty healthy, but they may not be recovering well at nighttime. So that could be an indicator that their health is going to decline. And we certainly know that people with insomnia and sleep apnea tend to develop cardiovascular disease earlier and have higher ramifications. On the other hand, good quality sleep has been shown to increase heart rate variability. The system is able to recover, and that's what that sign tells us. The sleep stages, there's different stages of sleep, and that can affect our heart rate variability within the night. So remember, we can look at it as an overall health marker across days, week over week, month over month, but we can also look at how it behaves during sleep at nighttime. So it's interesting, sleep it comes in cycles. And in the beginning of sleep, the deeper sleep occurs in the first couple of cycles of sleep, always followed by a period of a little bit of lighter sleep and then a period of REM sleep. So the first cycle of sleep should be longer, deep, and a very short REM sleep. As we move into the next stage of sleep, we can still have some deeper sleep. And then we're going to have a period of longer, lighter sleep, and maybe even a period of a little bit longer REM. By the time we move towards wakefulness, our deep sleep is non-existent. We have lighter sleep and we have long periods of REM sleep. And so the reason that occurs is, in the beginning, in order to get our body to be as into the phase as much as possible for recovery, because remember, in sleep, our body doesn't sleep, our brain does. And as we kind of move through those stages of deep sleep, there's a slow wave that starts in our frontal lobe. If you touch right up above your eyebrows, above your bridge of your nose, that's where those waves start. And they travel to the back of the head, the back of the brain. And they do this in this slow rhythmical process. And it kind of reminds you of like, yeah, rocking the baby. It's slow, it's beautiful, and it's designed to turn things down so that the brain can wash away all of the junk that it's picked up through the day, all of the crazy stuff that's happened, the amyloids and the trash that's in there. This is where the trash, gets loosened up and gets removed. As we move more into REM sleep, this is where so it disconnects everything in the deep sleep. REM sleep is designed to reconnect all of those and make sense out of them. So memory is starting to be formed here, things that are important priorities, things that have come up during the day. Does it make sense? Where do we put them in the memory banks? What do we need to hold on to? What do we need to let go of? And this is often why people in sleep, when they wake up in the morning, will say, wow, we had that conversation yesterday, and that all I could, through my whole nighttime, I was, dreaming about that. So, it can have, those nice types of things that happen, but that's where things are reconnected back. So that when we wake up in the morning, if we've had a really good feast at the deep sleep table and lovely movement through REM sleep, we wake up in the morning and we can just, whatever was a problem the day before, it's solvable. Like, I don't even know what I was worried about. This, it all works. I'm good. And that's the power of that, because we have access to those wonderful things like serotonin. And, and the cortisol's rising, but in a good way, because we need to be awake, we need to be alert and oriented, and we need melatonin to be suppressed in the morning. So we kind of goes through that so that we can work it all out. Because REM sleep can be quite real in our perception, it's interesting that mammals tend to have almost a paralysis when they sleep. But it's not the same as unconscious or anesthesia. We can have that. Have you ever tried to wake up and you just can't wake up and you can't move, and oh my goodness, and then all of a sudden you're awake and you can move? That little period of time. Well, we have the ability when we're in REM sleep, even though there may be that paralysis for our brain to do the things it needs to do while the body does what it needs to do. When that happens, we can come out of it fast. And you all know the story of somebody, the phone rings, the knock on the door, whatever, you can come alert pretty quickly. When you are unconscious, unfortunately, or if you're under anesthesia, which could be even alcohol induced or drug induced, you don't respond. That's the difference between that. So HRV can predict sleep problems, but it can also sleep can also affect HRV recovery. So it's got that nice thing, and it'll allow us to move through stressful events or exercise or mental stress easier because we have more adaptability. Remember that higher adaptability to do so. So I think everybody knows about stress, but a couple of things just to highlight here. Prolonged poor response to stress, not just a normal response to stress. Everybody has stress in their life, and our ability to weather it is important. We need to have stress to drive a car. We got to pay attention to the road and the cars that are oncoming. We have to pay attention to events and things that are happening in the moment. But when we have a prolonged poor response, in other words, we don't have enough variability to come down and reset, we end up with increased cortisol levels in the body, which is not normal. We need increased cortisol levels during the waking hours, but we don't need them to stay, and we don't need them to be abnormally high. And we certainly don't need them to rise at nighttime or to prevent us from falling asleep at night because the melatonin is being so suppressed from the cortisol. That's going to lead to high blood pressure and a decrease in heart rate variability. Interestingly enough, when we think about menopause, and we also know about losing some muscle mass and changes of the muscle tissue, when we have high increased cortisol levels with stress, We have breakdown of muscle. We have a suppressed immune system. We get sick easier. And then we have changes in GI activity, a lot of constipation. Sometimes this is when ulcers start to develop because we're losing that good hydrochloric acid in our stomach, and, you know, creates a lot of problems for us. So our emotional impact too on, you know, with stress is increased in nervousness and anxiety, changes in eating habits, particularly overeating, and then loss of enthusiasm and energy, and of course mood changes. And we're all familiar with those types of things there. And this is where HRV can come in to begin to start to change some of that. We can use HRV as a lever or an entryway or an entry point into the complex system of our physiology. So aerobic fitness level is very, very, very highly correlated with higher heart rate variability. And what they mean in the studies that they looked at with this is not how long you can do a cardiovascular activity like an aerobic, but how well you can get your heart rate up and how quickly you can recover. That's aerobic fitness. And people can achieve it in much different ways. And we're not going to go through the whole literature about what's the best way to achieve aerobic flexibility or physical fitness, because there's many ways. But just knowing that it's how quickly you can recover afterwards, and how if you can get your heart rate up to those target things and do pretty well while you're doing the exercise. So the cool thing about this is that exercise, this regular physical activity, trumps all other things about cardiovascular health, including the effects of gender on it. So fitness level has greater contribution to that than just the gender effects, which is really nice. That means we can do something about this. And it's significantly higher in active populations versus sedentary populations, right? For both male and females at all different ages. No one gets a break here. And then aerobic and anaerobic power training leads to similar responses in HRV. So have no fear, you can still work on keeping your muscle mass up and keep your strength capacity up and have a very positive effect on your HRV, which is important to kind of keep in mind. So when we're improving HRV, we want to think about a little biofeedback. And that's what we talked about earlier, like getting that measure, that readiness measure. There's a lot of things out there that will tell you what your readiness is. The Oura Ring does it, the Garmin do it. I am not familiar with the Apple Watches or any of the others, but I'm sure that they have a way to do that. And you want to look at that day after day, because that helps you know that what am I doing that's helping keep me in my readiness level that I can, keep moving today and I don't need a rest day. And if I'm looking at this daily, maybe then I can predict when things, if I wake up and things aren't so good and nothing has changed, wonder if I'm getting sick. And it'll tell you, maybe you need to back off a bit today, find some balance. Today may be a day where you need to rest and go for a walk, things like that. So it can help you find the balance. And we talk a lot about that with hormonal balance. What's the balance in exercise? Are you going Mach 5 with your hair on fire every day and you're still gaining weight? Or do you need to find that balance, like, okay, on my days of readiness, I can train a little harder. But if I have a day where it's not, and my readiness isn't so good, then maybe that's the day for the nice walk, the nice breathing, maybe doing more of a stretch class or Tai Chi or yoga or whatever, helps, bring you down, and just kind of brings you into balance. This can be a very nice way to determine what needs to happen, and also to really kind of hook it up to your own brain. How do I feel? I don't feel like I feel bad, but this information is telling me that I need to take it easier today. It helps you get in touch with your own self just a little bit better, because we tend to blow past that. It's like eating and the fullness scale, right? How many people pay attention to the fullness scale? But when you slow down and you chew your food and you listen for that, you're going to notice that you're way more full than you thought you were before you ever get to the end of your meal. So it's just kind of a way for helping us reset. Can we trust our body and our brain to tell us what we need to do? This talks a little bit about resonance frequency breathing, which we're going to practice in a little bit. But basically, we're looking at, the research is pretty clear, about 6 cycles of breaths per minute. And so that turns out to be about 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out. So the cool thing here is that all of those other things we're doing, the breathing effects of HRV breathing, which I just told you about, and meditation can cause immediate and marked improvement in HRV. So if you have a device that can track it, you can actually get an HRV reading before you do your 10, 15, 20-minute meditation, and then relook at it. Did it change? And over time, it should start changing. The most important thing, though, is that basal or that morning HRV changing over time? Because we know that we can make it better in the moment, but what we're looking for is for it to last, so that every time we measure it, it's, over a week, over a month, it's starting to have that that upward trend. So slow diaphragmatic breathing patterns with long exhales are going to be the most important for activating the vagus nerve and that parasympathetic system to increase our HRV. The research that they've done at Elite HRV, where this particular researcher comes from, and has looked at working up to 20 minutes daily, starting at 5 minutes, but working up to 20 minutes daily. And then you look for trends in the HRV baseline, that morning reading. I'm going to tell you right now, if you haven't done a guided paced breathing exercise, 5 minutes can be challenging. And it's not because you can't breathe and you can't do it. Of course you can, but how much your brain is used to wandering. So it really needs to be paced. You got to have a pacer in here to keep it going, especially if you get past the 5 minutes and start working up to 10 minutes and 15 minutes. It can make a big difference in staying on target and really helping that happen. This I thought was a great article that I came across. It just came out last year. And they looked at a bunch of different breathing, because everybody always asks me, well, what if I breathe like this? And what if I breathe like that? One of the things that they looked at was cyclic sign, which is what we just talked about, a longer exhale, shorter inhale. And then they looked at box breathing, which is the same, inhale and exhale are the same. And then they looked at shorter exhales with long inhales to try to, and they did it over 5 minutes. And one of the things that they found was that the effective stress management exercise was the one with the cyclic sign, the longer exhales. And that kind of goes with what we've known all along, but it's nice to see really good research coming out to help guide us as to, I've got 5 minutes. What's going to be the most effective thing I can do?